Good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I'm in my favorite part of the city today, the airport. But sadly, right now, I'm not getting back on an airplane. Not for this moment. But even better than that, I am going to be part of a 2-day conference. So super excited about that. It's an international conference that will be hosted in Canada this year. And it is going to be on GBV prevention and initiatives. And is really excited about that because I'm also going to now be able to meet with other individuals internationally. I've done a lot of things in America and the countries that I've traveled to within GBV, but this is going to be people from all over the world, and being able to see how it is that they address prevention as well as management of GBV within their communities and their countries that they serve. So I'm super excited about that. Also excited for this. Hope you all have an amazing day. And remember, in everything you do, lead with gratitude and discernment. International conference, or oh, it didn't fully fit. Oh, but that's cool.
Dignity of children and youth, and provides trauma-informed care through a multidisciplinary team, including legal services and support services. The young people that we serve are under the age of 18, with a few exceptions. So we do provide legal services to youth under the age of 25, whose legal issues relate to sexual violence or family violence. This also includes human trafficking. We also serve those up to 25 who are experiencing homelessness and or precarious immigration status. We do have a Ontario-wide mandate, so we are working with young people across the province. So we provide Your Way Forward services at Justice for Children and Youth as a collaborative team. The lawyers provide a wide range of legal services to folks who are experiencing family violence, sexual assault, human trafficking.
And I'm a social worker at the Advocacy Center for Tenants Ontario. I'm joined by my Your Way Forward project co-lead, Samaya Bauer, who is a staff lawyer. We're so pleased to be here to share about the work that we do. So the Advocacy Center for Tenants Ontario is a specialty housing legal clinic that supports and advances the rights of low-income tenants in Ontario. ACTO's mandate includes providing legal advice, representation, law reform, community organizing, and education. ACTO is perhaps best known for our Tenant Duty Council program, where we provide brief legal advice to tenants who attend their hearing with the Landlord and Tenant Board without a lawyer. And I'm a social worker at the Advocacy Center for Tenants Ontario. I'm joined by my Your Way Forward project co-lead, Samaya Bauer, who is a staff lawyer. We're so pleased to be here to share about the work that we do. So the Advocacy Center for Tenants Ontario is a specialty housing legal clinic that supports and advances the rights of low-income tenants in Ontario. ACTO's mandate includes providing legal advice, representation, law reform, community organizing, and education. ACTO is perhaps best known for our Tenant Duty Council program, where we provide brief legal advice to tenants who attend their hearing with the Landlord and Tenant Board without a lawyer.
Rental housing is a key part of the system, even though some landlords view it as separate. Survivors often leave their homes because of the violence itself. In our study, only one participant was able to remain in her unit. Many survivors on couch surf with friends or family, which strains the relationship. In northern, rural, and indigenous communities where new housing is not being built, couch surfing is often the only long-term housing option. Others shelter in hotels, cars, garages, and unwinterized sheds and cabins, which is a form of hidden homelessness. Visible homelessness is also growing. Shelters are at capacity, encampments are increasing across Ontario. In our study, 27% of participants had lived outside at some point. Survivors who became unsheltered experienced far more years of trauma, chronic homelessness, and housing instability than those who did not. We'll now turn to the legal context, beginning with the unique rental housing challenges that survivors face and the limited protections available under current legislation. Participants identified a wide range of roommate abuse was another growing issue, as many people share smaller spaces and sometimes form intimate partner relationships. Finally, discrimination and harassment by landlords is widespread. Faced with this carousel of rental issues, many survivors choose to leave their home rather than stay and try and fight their legal issues. And legal protections remain limited under Ontario's Residential Tenancies Act. If there is a joint tenancy, the survivor cannot remove the person from harm on the lease. And there is an N15 tenants notice to end the tenancy because of fear of sexual or domestic violence and abuse. Survivors can break the lease due to violence, giving a 28 days notice, but it has limited usefulness in today's affordability crisis.
And today I will focus on the first, which is a call to declare IPV and GBV epidemics. This public declaration would compel all levels of government to increase funding to end GBV and must include adequate funding for the housing and homelessness sector. Because survivors face unique rental housing challenges, the provincial government must also increase funding for housing legal services to support survivors' right to security of tenure. This declaration could be used immediately in courts, tribunals, and administrative bodies as evidence that adjudicators must consider the severity of the survivor situation when making their decisions. This has the potential to increase survivors' access to justice.
For tenants experiencing gender-based violence, including support with housing access, tenant applications, and eviction cases. Every client receives wraparound services from a lawyer and a social worker. Our services are trauma-informed and intakes are conducted jointly, so clients only have to tell their story once and have access to counseling. We maintain a low barrier model. We don't have any income eligibility. We help regardless of immigration status, and we have no time limits on our support. Collaboration is central to our work. We partner closely with actors in the gender-based violence and legal sectors, including our Your Way Forward partner clinics. Our model is survivor-informed and continuously improved through feedback. It's been designed for replication across Ontario and can be adapted by organizations to meet the complex needs of survivors in your region. And in addition to direct service, we actively engage in law reform. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more, please reach out directly or visit our website for our report and executive summary.
Of decolonizing GBV work. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi everyone. I'm Lauren Power. I'm the Executive Director of the Muskoka Parry Sound Sexual Assault Services. And I'm talking today just about two programs that we have funded. I'm going to begin by just saying my pronouns are she and her, and I also want to express gratitude to the many teachers that I've had in this journey. Staff members, board, more. I've been with the agency now for 22 years, and our agency began, if you look in the corner, there's a logo with a sweetgrass braid around it, which was made in it. And so I just want to acknowledge those folks over the years who have recognized the amount of colonial violence, its ties, and it's really the umbrella over which gender-based violence is just a part. And so I'm going to begin by just saying these projects for our sexual assault for our sexual assault center developed from circle discussions with human trafficking survivors and the frontline supporters for them.
These are the poster abstracts that individuals submitted on addressing and preventing gender-based violence. I'm gonna come back to take some of those. And these are some of the table stations that are set up.
It was yesterday. And then I guess it was just for one. I asked for it to be extended.
This is our poster for our project that we just did the community forum on Saturday for. Hello.
See you around.
Thank you. See you around also.
And the RISE program was also able to connect with other supports and resources out of province to help facilitate that and help connect with other services that could help Dee ongoing. So I just wanted to share with you that. And last time we spoke to Dee, she felt safe and she felt supported. And I can't even imagine where she would have been.
So the lady I was speaking with, BJ Ray, she let me know that this is just 70% of all the calls. So these were all the ones that were, so 70% were women and women identified individuals being abused by men. The next 30% were women and women identified individuals that were abused by women or women identified individuals. And then also male and male identified individuals being abused by male and male identified individuals, as well as male and male identified individuals being abused by women or women identified individuals. So this is just 70% of all the calls. The other 30% is what I mentioned. Okay, and lunch is about to start. Hello, fine. How are you?
This being important, I was like, okay, we'll do this anyways. So thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch.
Can we join you?
Yes.
So our work consistently shows that 2S LGBTQIA+ youth are at a heightened risk for relationship violence, and that youth do not feel skilled in navigating relationships. So, Taking Pride was a 6-session relationship violence prevention program for queer and trans youth aged 13 to 18 BC. Designed to foster healthy relationship skills, the program was implemented across high schools and intersectionality alliance groups.
And for anyone that may not know, fun fact, I always wanted to be a pediatric nurse and work at sick kids, but then I wanted to be in gender-based violence because I realized I could never be the person to tell someone that their child may not live or that they're sick and then not be able to support them and just like pass them over to like a social worker or something. So I said I didn't want to have to be reactive, I want to be preventative. But this is also cool to see that sick kids can still be open, maybe within like a different sphere of like research versus frontline staffing. So super excited about this.
That is integrative, multimodal, and flexible, and that really takes all of these principles into consideration. So now on an even more fine-grained level, these are some of the specific strategies that guide our work. So first, we really recognize that our youth present with complex clinical profiles that require a specialized, individualized approach to mental health care. So one-size-fits-all model does not work for this population. We really recognize that trauma is at the forefront for our youth, and so we bring that lens to kind of all provision of service that we carry out. We recognize that a lot of the youth that we serve are not going to be a great fit for highly structured models of care, which is why our model is integrative, multimodal, and really tailored to each youth's unique needs. So we pull from different orientations depending on the youth's individual needs. So for example, at time we might draw on CBT skills when really directly working with the PTSD symptoms. We might pull on DBT skills when there's kind of crisis of emotion.
Professor and Canada Research Chair at the University of Toronto. It's my pleasure to be here. It's also, I'm riding off a little bit of adrenaline because we're having problems with slides, which is exactly what we want reading the presentation. Would it be helpful to run it off of the drive? Off of the thumb drive? Project that came out of community partnership with an organization called Dr. Borna Masami Foundation, which is a foundation within the city, runs predominantly in Toronto, but operates across Ontario, and provides gold standard dental care to individuals who have experienced intimate partner violence. They contacted me because I do a lot of research on access and access in the context of marginalized populations within health systems globally. And they found that the program that they had developed and had been running for a number of years In Toronto, the patient population didn't reflect at all the population diversity within the city of Toronto, and they wanted to know why. So we partnered and were able to receive some funding, and when the slide eventually comes up, you'll see we pieced together funding from a lot of different places to do some qualitative research that we supplemented with arts-based methods to ask this question of barriers to access to dental care among racialized women. We prioritized Black women, South Asian, East Asian, and Latinx, reflecting the main racialized populations within our area. So you might think to yourself, my goodness, dental care is such a niche level of support, and I thought this as well. But those of us working in the field know that head trauma and trauma to the face is one of the most common injuries that individuals face. And given the lack of funding for dental care, it looks like we're just going to talk about this research. I can show the slides.
Can I get your laptop?
Oh, sure, it's in my bag. This is lots of it. So, we designed a qualitative research project. We recruited about 20 women and engaged them in interviews. We also recruited a number of dentists and shelter, people who worked within the shelter system and other community organizations. This is really fun. Okay, and essentially took them through a set of research to understand women's perspectives, service providers' perspectives, community perspectives on what are some of the challenges with engaging with the dental care sector. We then invited women back to participate in an arts-based methods to develop self-portraits using collage methods to basically tell their story of access and to tell their story of why it was meaningful to be able to experience, have dental care needs addressed, and what that meant in terms of, I mean, honest by training, which you might think this is such an interesting intersection, but we were interested in understanding the way in which dental care provides a route to economic empowerment, provides a route to confidence and re-entry into one's life, and all of those things, as you can imagine, will come up. And we get the video to work. We developed a lovely visual story that tells the story of this research. Why I feel like this work has had, so where are we? Okay, so that's great. You could probably skip, well, maybe we'll just show slide 3 because I'd love to be able to acknowledge the people who are involved in this research. So we have a number of community partners who are involved in the program, a large advisory committee who continue to be quite engaged across a number of institutions.
You're doing great, honestly.
Okay, so what I'm going to tell you, okay, so let's just skip. That's the methods, we already talked about that. Okay, so I really am hoping this is going to work good. This is a digital story which brings together the art pieces and the women's, the quotes that you hear are quotes that have come directly from the research, which tell their story.
But I feel like they're looking back at mine too. like you're stronger. I guess your body's more resilient to pain. They're wrong. They thought I was the abuser. They kept asking me what I did, and I'm like, what I did? I was in a really dark space. I was here, but I was present. My teeth were the last thing on my mind. And when it happened, I broke my teeth completely, and I only had money for one filling. They told me they're used to country. If the government doesn't cover it, I said, oh my god, it's expensive. I can't do it. Repairing my teeth or buying groceries for my kids. Clothes. What was I gonna do? I don't go for certain job interviews and stuff because I don't feel confident enough. I don't feel comfortable with my smile at all. I don't communicate with people with confidence to get the job or just be I don't want to speak. There's just so much that starts from the mouth. And if it's not addressed, well then it just multiplies into everything else. Ever since I got the surgery, my tooth doesn't hurt. My abscess is gone. My gums look healthier. I'm happier. Just having my smile back has restored my confidence and made me feel like I can take my entire health back. I hope in the future that dental care will be more accessible to the people who need it, regardless of circumstances. And just be kind because you don't know what people have gone through to get here. And we deserve help.
So we can maybe stop the video there. Thank you. And you just move to the next slide, is my final slide. So we used digital storytelling as one way to bring the experiences we heard in the interviews together with the information we heard from providers, together with the art pieces. And actually, just this week, the paper's been accepted in dental traumatology, which is really exciting. What you heard in those voices and experiences is the kind of complexity of the challenges and pervasiveness of trauma that really presents as people enter the dental chair in this very close space that requires a lot of trust from the provider. We also learned quite a lot about the ways of questions that are going to go into the exam that all dentists have to write within, to be accredited in Ontario. So we didn't dream this was going to happen, but here we are, and so I'm delighted to have
Fresh pretzels and cheese. Another snack time. And this is our abstract poster presentation. So this is for the project that we've been working on for the last 2.5 years that was funded by Wage Canada. And this was also the project that we just had our community forum on this past Saturday. And today, October 1st, we are part of a 2-day international conference. And we are at day 2 of the conference. We're all set and ready to go. Yesterday was amazing. We did poster abstract presentations. So I shared with you guys what all the posters look like, brought you guys inside and let you see some of day 1 content, what inside some of the presentations look like. And today is one of the feature presentations on one of the projects that we've been working on for the last year and a half that I was privileged enough to be part of. It's a male prevention on how to address GBV in communities from a male facilitation lens to participants. So super excited about that, and let's go, you guys. And day 2, did I actually come early enough for breakfast? Even though there's lots of things I missed because it started at 8 o'clock. That is International Ballroom A. I believe I'm in New York a lot today. This is Paris. That was day 1 Paris. This is day 2 Paris. And the feature presentation for day 2 in New York is at 10:15, engaging Black men as leaders in domestic violence and prevention. Super excited. So that's in this room. And it will be starting, what time is it? It's 9:26. International Ballroom B and C. And currently, right now, is the Trauma and Violence Informed Approaches with Victims of Gender-Based Violence by Nadine.
Things we do as soon as we get out of bed are risky, and there are ways to reduce those risks and potential harms. So again, to sort of bring it back to that level of understanding and neutralizing some of the language that can be harmful, and really be a barrier to good decision making, especially with harm reduction. So, how does this apply to the gender-based violence sector? And I do have to say, I was so delighted when Public Health Agency of Canada had a call for proposals in this area, because I've been working for almost 3 decades on gender-based violence, and especially trying to support the sector, but also get the health sector to do a better job. And separately on the EQUIP work, and TBIC, and equity-oriented care, and this was the opportunity to bring it together. So I've got 3 years until I retire, I'm doing this. Very, very excited about this. 2 forms of evidence support from sort of a research perspective why this is important. So this is a paper, and again, anything you see here, QR codes don't work. My email address is at the end. Just flip me an email, I will send you any of these and links to all these resources. But my colleague Tara Manter and I did a review of systematic reviews on what's effective in terms of IPV interventions across the spectrum, from primary prevention, identification and initial response, through to secondary and tertiary prevention. And basically, and also interventions to support couples and those using violence in relationships. Basically, those that embed this more structural, TBIC equity promoting lens. So for example, the Duluth model, when you're working with men using violence, are the ones that show the most effect. So there is an evidence imperative around this as well, to have that lens, to understand those root causes, instead of bringing everything down to an individual level and saying, well, you just snapped, or it's got mental health problems, or, right? It is that sort of critical understanding of those. Created by a colleague of mine as a master, Dr. Andrea Gonzalez, where it really shows those interlinkages between what they call adverse childhood experiences and brain function and the body. So how trauma is in the body and how it affects those. So that I would recommend watching that video. So now we come to the B, and adding the B. It's easy in this room because you've got the B that affect particular indigenous peoples in Canada, and those are still active. So as long as we have B in that, we will have ongoing no harms. So it's not just things that have happened in the past. It's the effects now, but also the ongoing that's happening. And we know, and the people that come from the sort of health and medical side, which I don't, I work in the School of Nursing, but I'm not a nurse, I sort of snuck in to try to help change health systems. We know that trauma does reorganize, both brilliant together or fools seldom differ, whichever. Katrina and Angelique wrote a paper similarly looking at how we embed TDIC into supports for those using violence relationships and found similar results. And these are really, I think there's good momentum to start to orient interventions and to convince our funders and policy folks that this is the way we need to be doing things. So with funding from Public Health Agency of Canada, colleagues at UBC and UNB and those at Western University of London are working to equip the gender-based violence sector for equity. So we've done needs assessment and interviews with those providing direct service to survivors, with leaders. We've worked with a number of organizations, listed here, a couple out west, several in London, including the Muslim Resource Center, because we're very concerned about how newcomer women get care and services around their entry into Canadian society. We've worked with ANOVA, which is the largest sexual assault, gender-based violence, and domestic violence centers in Ontario, London Youth Women's Center, and as I mentioned, Changing Ways. So from this work, we know that all three key dimensions are very important according to those who are providing service. But TDIC has a particular role because the V is that door in, and it's often one that resonates with people. They often are the thing that leads to a decision for a woman to get a shelter bed, which are always at over capacity, as we know, or not. So the impacts of those implicit biases that people might carry in the moment can be extremely harmful for clients when they're seeking care. It's almost like, does she deserve care if she's using substances or if she's in an acute mental health situation? And that usually gets translated in, well, having her here won't be safe for the kids who are on site. And again, what does safe mean in that context? Is it about your comfort or disruption, or is it actually about safety? These are hard thoughts to have, hard reflections to do, for sure. I live in downtown London. We've had a huge increase in homelessness and street-level sleeping, people sleeping around on the street. And sometimes people are in acute distress, and they're ranting on the street. And you can be like, I'm never going downtown again. Or you can say, perhaps we can support this guy, get him over to one of the drop-ins for a cup of coffee. Right? That's a decision that we can make. So I do try to demystify and unpack what we mean by safety, and it often is discomfort, because we know in some ways we're complicit with not solving this problem. So how does equity-oriented care through, again, that TDIC door become a core practice orientation? Well, we know that people who have experienced GBV have a much greater likelihood of chronic pain, poor mental health, and unhealthy substance use. People with chronic pain are more likely to use substances in harmful ways. GBV has cumulative effects on mental health and substance use health, as well as on physical health. Again, if you look at impacts on sleeping, on chronic pain, it is all sort of a complex, interwoven messiness of feeling extremely unwell and it being really difficult to make decisions. When we add in things like brain injuries from strangulation and blows to the head, you can also see how those effects might influence the ability to make decisions for next steps. And again, leaving in those experiences of structural violence, often, and again, some of these sort of myths and misunderstandings that we need to demystify a little bit. Substance use is often seen as causing gender-based violence. Following this, it's used to exonerate perpetration. So, he had too much to drink. That was certainly the hockey player excuse that she had too much to drink. Everybody had too much to drink. It's constructed as increasing vulnerability to survivors, so therefore they're blamed for having put themselves in a situation where they are experiencing violence. And it can be used as a form of coercion. So we often see
this
that.
room. Mercy. I will find them. And this is the next side.
So how do we untie those really difficult knots? This is a diagram I'm not going to go over, but it basically shows that it is the intertwining of stigma that causes a lot of the harm. Thankfully, we have a whole free e-learning module to have a look at that learning module. So when we get from trauma-informed to trauma and violence-informed, it's really addressing those systemic and structural forms of violence and making those a core feature of how you think about how that person is presented in your service and how you're designing your service to be responsive to both what's happened in the past, but importantly, to what might still be happening in that person's life. And to really frame some of the downstream consequences for that person, for your client, such as unhealthy substance use, as anticipatable. That it's something that your organization and you as a provider should be prepared to deal with if you really are providing equity-oriented care and ensuring that people are safe when they come to you. And again, moving to this more structural lens gets away from thinking about people as having something wrong in their heads and thinking more about what's happened and is still happening in their lives. And that's an important cognitive switch for us because it leads us to empathy and away from judgment, which is another sort of core path that we're trying to walk with at TPIC. And really, in this space, acknowledging those complexities and the chronicity of the trauma and its ongoing effects and those broken relationships of trust and care and how difficult they can be for impatience. So the core TPIC principles are quite simple. As I said, they're very adaptable to different settings and contexts. We can use them in policing services. And it's really bringing in those key principles that we've seen in other models of TIC. Sometimes they're up to 10 different principles. We've tried to simplify them to 4, and in fact, some of our work and some of the curricula I develop, I combine 3 and 4 because they're related in terms of providing spaces of trust and collaboration and person or woman-led decision-making, but also building on her strengths and your strengths as a provider as well. So always seeing that work as relational and what you as a provider are bringing into it in your organization and support providers in their practice. Which might mean giving people a bit more time in those interactions.
And then we have after breakfast mini chocolate muffins, strawberry smoothies with apple juice and yogurt, more chocolate muffins, and what I will be taking, an apple, a Red Delicious. I love a Red Delicious. London.
And Cheryl Thompson. So I'm going to invite them up to the front and please give them a round of applause. See folks, and we are going to have a pretty interactive session. Do folks like interaction? Yes. Awesome. And so we're hoping that you will engage with us. You'll be speaking to us, with each other, as we go through this presentation.
And hi everyone, I'm Cheryl Thompson, and as one of the facilitators of this men's program, I definitely learned that interaction is integral. So we have several reflective questions. We're going to get your voice. It's almost like we're doing live research in the room because we're capturing this as part of what we're doing on an ongoing basis. So my name is, again, Cheryl, and while I wear many hats, I'm a social worker by trade. I'm in academia. Within this project, I took a co-lead position. And the reason being is because I wanted to see this project from a different lens. I have my own lived experience with intimate partner violence, and so this is very near and dear to me. And also, I started my career working in shelter systems with women and children, and involved working with children, and eventually started to work with perpetrators, which unfortunately was predominantly men. And as I became segued into academia, I started to become really interested with how can I work with eradicating domestic violence specifically within my community, and thus came to do many different research studies. And on this one, I wanted to take multiple different hats, which you'll hear as we go along. And as such, I'm the community leader in this one, and one of the facilitators of the actual program. Do you want to say more about yourself, Katrina? Because I don't think you said enough.
I know. Okay. All right. It's so funny. It's like, what do I say? Okay, so I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary. I'm originally from Toronto, so this is my old stomping ground. My family's still here. In terms of my research, I've been doing this research for some time now. I remember working in a shelter for abused women and their children, and really felt inspired to do this work. And one of the things I realized is that the underrepresentation of Black women in the shelter system and Black people's voices, right? So I'm like, you know what, I really need to do this work. And so I did my BSW at York University, did my first degree at U of T, did my BSW at York University, and then I did my master's at TMU, formerly known as Robertson. And then I drifted off to McGill to start my PhD, but finished my PhD at Wilfrid Laurier. And so my research looked at the intersection between victimization and criminalization, specifically for Black women who've been charged with using violence in their relationships. And my good friend and colleague, Cheryl's like, have you considered looking at Black men's experiences? And so I'm like, sure, I'll do that. And so we've been on this journey for 4 years now.
So the objective of the workshop, we want to identify trauma-informed and Afrocentric frameworks for engaging Black men in domestic violence prevention, explore strategies for training and mobilizing Black men as peer mentors and community leaders, and apply relational and healing-centered approaches to foster accountability and transformation. So how are Black men framed in your work is our starting question. So we want to just give you an opportunity to have some notepads and paper. You can use your phone, I see the phone's already coming out, whatever you need to do to think about it, but we want to hear from you in terms of this question. I want you to think about ways that Black men show up or are made to show up in your policies or programs, in your research. So what you can write as a prompt here is one dominant narrative, explicit or implicit, about Black men you've seen in your work. One way that these narratives have shaped practice or policies in your setting, and one missed opportunity for leadership, accountability, or healing you have observed.
And we want you to be, honest. We want you to name those stereotypes as well, right? So don't make it pretty. Just be honest and transparent with the narratives that you have seen.
What I also say is keep it, don't filter, but keep it G-rated. So let's take a couple seconds here to let that sink in, and then we can start anywhere in terms of what are your thoughts. Don't filter what's coming to mind in terms of the experiences about how Black men are framed in the work that you do. And if they're not framed, that's something as well to highlight as well.
I'm from Surrey, British Columbia, working at diversity, and in our programs we don't, I haven't seen many Black men as clients, but what we're hearing from women, Black women, especially from Nigeria, is that they're great providers, they're great partners, women really rely on them, and back home polygamy was okay. We wanted to just listen and not to judge, and then we ask more questions. So that's what in terms of my connection and through my clients, that's the image.
Others. The room tends to lose us as we talk, so.
You said not to filter, right? So as a Black woman working with Black women, I think most men are devils. And you've seen, that's the community, bringing it from the community, and we see that many of our Black men are labeled as I see the baby papas, and you don't know where it's coming from, but it's like monkey do, monkey see, monkey do. So the younger men, in the absence, like grow up without the presence of, many of them grow up without the presence of their fathers, because of all the systemic whatever. And so as such, they don't have models, to teach them, positive masculinity. And so they learn from the streets, they learn from as African Canadians, we learn from the African American tribe and things like that. And I'll tell you, it's also being pushed on the kids in the schools. So just a very brief, lived experience of mine. So when my child was junior kindergarten, in Ontario we do, early screening, dental screening. So as he was one of the youngest in the class, and he wasn't willing to open to others. So when the nurse was trying to get him to open his mouth, he told him, that the nurse was disturbing him and was going to put her in a cage. Do you know, when I went to pick him up that day, I got a lecture by the principal. Because the principal wanted to ask me, oh, did something happen over the weekend? Because Khalid mentioned something about jail. I said, no, we don't use that. I said cage. He must have said cage because we didn't use jail in the house at that time. And I told him, yeah, we were just wondering. I said, well, all kids play robbers and cops, right?
Hi, my name is Danielle Jocelyn, and I'm here with the Canadian Foundation in terms of partnership we're collaborating with. However, I'm speaking with and on behalf of my work as chair of the Black Women's Center for Montreal. And in regards to our work with Black men, the words that came up from me were absent in the presence of the work. So we are focused on accessible mental health care for Black communities in Montreal. A little bit difficult to engage and to include in conversations, and there's definitely barriers of recruitment. However, doing incredible work in their own respective ways when it comes to designing wellness spaces for men in Montreal. There's a lot of great things and initiatives happening. When I had recently surveyed them to understand what was contributing to their lack of engagement and or the barriers for recruitment, what came up was, fear of vulnerability. And another big theme was not wanting to be perceived as something, as if something was wrong with them. Because when we talk about wellness specifically and mental health and trauma specifically, women are much more open and can be gendered to having these conversations. Black men, on the other hand, I think are still a little weary and were willing to engage so long as the tone of the conversation wasn't around mental health or wellness. So we had to learn how to switch our framing a little bit and still have those conversations.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Susan. I'm also from Calgary, so it's great to have Calgary in the room. The organization that I'm with in Calgary, we provide a second stage shelter and then a children's center for kids who've experienced violence and abuse and trauma. But the organization was led by a Black woman for about 16 years. We have Black leadership. And so how we see Black men is kids' dads. And even though we're providing shelter to women who are at greatest risk of being killed by their ex-partner, and that's the frame that we've taken because the courts are still requiring co-parenting. And so that's I think, maybe it's just atypical in terms of our posture, but at the end of the day, they're kids' dads, and so that's the approach, and that's how we try and engage. And even in our program design and planning, it's going from that fatherhood lens. I've also worked in forensics. That's a whole different experience, and I would say my experience in working in forensics is that Black men are a few ladder steps above Indigenous men, but not treated very well.
Hi everyone, my name is Ella. I'm from Sudbury, and recently, so that's why I'm really happy about this topic. So just recently, I started working as a facilitator for the whole program through the advocacy. And one of the reasons we're partnering with the Afro Women in Youth Center in Sudbury. And one of the major reasons why BCA decided to partner with the Afro Women in Youth Center is because they're more centralized, maybe around Nigerians, coming to Sudbury, newcomers. And there was a recent incident that happened where a man killed his mother-in-law and then stabbed his wife, but she was lucky to get away, and he tried to kill himself. So coming from that angle, it's about men being maybe, I don't want to use the word, maybe being evil or something like that, but if you got to see or hear from people who knew the woman personally, you would find there was a situation whereby the man was broken. He was a provider, came from home, he came over from Nigeria and came to Sudbury. She was a student and he decided he was working and he paid all the bills. He sold everything that he had back home. And when she got here, got into money, and the man who originally is an architect probably got to Canada and couldn't get work in this field, so probably started doing lower income jobs just to make ends meet. She was off of school and started earning money, and then always getting shifts and all of that, and finding the children, and then maybe she brought him one in, but both of them teamed up and really made up their minds life living in hell. So it was all like that for years, and he couldn't cope anymore. So that's why he did what he did. So sometimes, I know there's no excuse to kill anybody, there's no excuse to commit crime or do something bad. But sometimes when men too are humans, they have blood flowing in them. And when you push someone to the wall, to the edge, there's an adage, it's a Nigerian adage, it says that, the goat is a very calm animal. Nobody has ever known a goat to bite or to do anything. But there's a saying that when you push a goat to the wall, when it doesn't have anywhere to go, he might want to attack you with the horns so that he or she can escape. So that's one of the things that I feel like, that's what's happening with a lot of men. It's evil or what's been done to them, and then they begin to revolt. And then everyone blames it on them and says, oh, a black man is a criminal, but sometimes it has to do with circumstances. So that's where I see black men from a place of honor and a book. Thank you.
Thank you. So just one more.
Hi, my name is Natania, and I'm from the GTA. I won't disclose where I work for safety reasons, but I do work within a management position, and I do oversee a good percentage of women domestic violence. I would say, from the time that I worked there, when you first asked the question, the word that came to me was violent. And I don't know, I was listening to everyone, I feel like a lot of people have great things to say, and I don't want to be like, maybe the negative person in the room, but in the time I've worked at the organization I have been, we've had some pretty serious safety concerns, including also femicides that were perpetrated upon our women and children, specifically by black men or their ex-partners. So I think that is one of the trends that we see, but I also wanted to piggyback off of an individual that I mentioned, the Aboriginal community, and I think that they do really great work, whether that's through their Moose High campaign or just other initiatives to engage men in the LGBT sector. So I think that's really where, when we think of how we can support our men, or maybe why some of these things are happening, it's definitely generational, but I also think that there is literally no support when it comes to engaging black men and teaching them about healthy relationships. At the place that I work at, we have implemented a public education program specifically for this purpose, to go out in the community as well as go out into the schools to engage young Black men and teaching them forms of healthy relationship. But I also wanted to maybe also bring in another angle to this, just because I also don't know maybe people in this room, but from personal experience, a lot of violence has been perpetrated, whether it's upon maybe myself or people that I know, specifically from Black men, whether it may be your fathers, grandfathers, uncles, brothers. So I think that's also an important context to include in the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Wow, I just want, if folks hear me, this seems to be triggering for you in any way. Please know that you can step out. If you need support, also let us know, and we'll be here to guide you through it, okay? It's what we're going to be sharing today, what you might hear from others in the room, might be triggering, might be emotional. Definitely, I think, I'm not removed from this work because I'm very much in the trenches along with Cheryl. And it's like, it still gets emotional as well, even working through the manuals, and you'll hear more about that work. But we're going to continue.
Visible, and then where are they erased? How do these narratives impact domestic violence prevention work? So as we funnel down and think about the first two questions, how do the things that frame what we do prevent us from actually doing the work? So as an example, violent came out, right? So where are Black men made visible in terms of this idea of violence, and where are they erased or made invisible? And then how does that idea of violence prevent us in terms of doing that work, domestic violence prevention work, if we're framing them in that way? We ask for reflection, so we have to ask for steps too. Oh, you got one?
Yeah, thank you. We work with men who use violence in their relationships by offering the partner self-response program, which in Ontario is mandated by the Ministry of Attorney General for individuals who are charged to go and complete this program, learn about healthy relationships, and that violence is wrong. It's a psychoeducational group for those who don't know enough about that. So when we have men from the Black communities, of course, when you talk about violence and trauma and healthy and not, for someone who's been exposed to trauma, even if it's psychoeducational, you're removing parts of them that you might not know about. And when Black men try to talk about these things, sometimes I hear my facilitators shutting them down. No, we're here to take accountability. But again, how can you take accountability when you are hurt? When you feel that the person who hurt you did not take responsibility. So, it's hard work to balance accountability with compassion. But I think our focus, because we often talk about being sector based on justice, right? So you're either good or you're bad, right? So we can't think beyond that in part. I'm just talking about part. And then we're doing more harm than good when we're shutting down those conversations because, oh my God, I have to cover this topic today. So I don't have time to listen to you, or I'm uncomfortable with what you're sharing with me about how you've been mistreated. I don't know how to deal with that. I'm not a therapist. All these things that happen inside of our head. So I think that prevents us from doing good domestic violence prevention work. I'm not just talking about IPV too. I'm talking domestic violence as an umbrella, because women face violence not just from intimate partner, right? From other individuals in their lives, and also men face violence that is different, but also from partners sometimes. And we know, if we want to talk stats, a actually, we never talk about that because we always focus on physical violence. But do we know that men and women experience emotional and psychological violence at similar rates? But men, in addition to that, have to deal with ridicule, feelings of like invalidation, feelings of being dismissed. So the impact is huge. It's huge. And it's not to minimize the impact on women, but I think we do disservice if we ignore the need to support women.
Thank you. Thank you. On Monday night, our topic was about accountability. And as we framed it and talked about it, and by the end of it, I must have said something very profound, because every man said that we talked about this idea of accountability without assigning shame to accountability, so they were able to share and be their true selves. I see Katrina prompting me, so we do need to keep moving so we get the moving. Those systems have shown up in the violent acts that they use. And one of the things that has come up a lot as well is this idea of silence. Being silenced within society as being an act of violence. Right? I get so passionate too, so I want to run over my words as well. So trying to calm myself down. So child welfare systems, education systems, health systems, all the various systems. And while some of them may not have the language, they have the experiences that inform the language, the lived experiences of what they've actually went through. And what we're also seeing is a community coming together within the group to inform the things that they're experiencing individually as a collective issue, not that it's just individual. We have a legacy of patriarchy. So we have a society that has provided a notion of how Black men are supposed to show up and what it should be like, and a lot of the challenges for them around not showing up in the same way. So what was interesting too is that within the current group, there are young men, there are elders within the group, so the range of age is quite beautiful. And what I hear a lot is the younger folks talking a lot about the different roles that they want to actually have in their life, whether it be fathers, whatever it is, and how they don't want to show up in the way in which they've been framed. And how they are now taking accountability to say, well, I have agency and choice to actually show up in different ways. Because there's intergenerational trauma, a lot of discussions around, well, this is just passed down, this is how we always do it, so, is there another way to do it? And it might sound like, oh, it goes without saying, but when you've been rendered powerless in a system, you really are not seeing outside of the box to be able to say there's another way to do something, or how to do it when you're almost feeling shackled by just living day to day and the racial trauma that you're experiencing within yourself. So our guiding frameworks. We use Ubuntu, I am because we are. That centers every single one of our experiences. We take our individual experiences and bring it back collective in terms of doing the work collectively. We use our Afrocentric knowledge and principles, community healing. I'm often saying every week, this idea of we're healing collectively. We are doing this work. So we center language, also dealing with my own experiences of hearing what I'm hearing. So healing and legacy. So what are we gonna do? We're talking about how do we change this for the next generation. We're actively thinking about the next generation as we're actually doing this work. And then critical race theory. Critical race theory and trauma informed. So recognizing that many of the experiences are trauma led or traumatic for the person. They're not just incidents, but sometimes many different incidents that bring them to the place that they are. And our critical race theory, which just grounds us in terms of the collection at every stage, actually. At every stage, we've been using that to kind of ground our own knowledge as a team and within the group to center what it is that we're doing. This is you now? Yes.
Click on, do I thought that would be better. Can folks hear me? Awesome. All right, so I just want to say, I'll tell you a little bit about the project in terms of how, who funded the project and so forth and how things have been going. So this is a Public Health Agency of Canada funded project. It's 4 years. And there are essentially 4 phases to the project. And we didn't want to make assumptions, despite our own positionality and social location as Black women doing this work. we really wanted to understand, what is a body of literature, scholarship out there? What are folks saying? And I must say, even when I was doing my own research from my master's to my PhD, there is still very little research. I'm one of a handful of scholars across Canada that's doing this work, right? And so even with the government of Canada, it's only recently that they have started to do this aggregated data, right? So before everyone was homogenized as what? Minorities, and it's like now we have some research on Black people, we have some research on Asian folks, so it's we still have a long way to go, right? In terms of this research, we did a scoping review, we did an environmental scan, and those the findings that we have, those will be published soon. One of the environmental scan, we really wanted to understand what are some services available to Black communities. Very few across Canada. We also wanted to understand what is a scholarship? How are Black communities defining domestic violence? So in our phase one, we really wanted to meet with practitioners to understand what are the conceptualizations of domestic violence in Black communities. And even though I've been doing this work, as I've said, I was quite surprised in terms of, that's how they're defining domestic violence. And they're not using conjugal violence, intimate partner violence, domestic violence. They're using such words as he hit me, he pushed me, and they're using other things. He's just being erratic or whatever. And so for us, even doing this work, that's really important for us to recognize that the terms that we use, I think sometimes we sanitize it, right? These are Eurocentric terms that might not reflect well in Black communities. And for me, being from Ontario but living in Alberta now, we have a large African population, people from various parts of Africa. And for me, that was an eye-opener in terms of how these communities also define domestic violence, right? We wanted to make sure that the research was rooted in community. So how might this be perceived by the community? We asked them about even the conceptualizations that we've come up with to get their feedback. And so tons of data, we have tons of data that we have generated over the last 3 years. And now, as Cheryl has mentioned, she is she is facilitating the men's group, and it is so rich. It is so rich, just developing the manuals was an eye-opener, but also an emotional process. And you will hear more about that as we continue. Next slide, please. All right, so the purpose of this project, men were always our number one priority, but we took a wide, broad community approach. And so for this project, we looked at practitioners' perspective, people with lived experiences of domestic violence to inform the work. And it's after we gather that data from looking at what the scholarship is telling us, what our practitioners telling us, the people with lived experiences telling us about DV, that we said, okay, we feel well positioned now to develop these manuals to train Black men. So there were 3 manuals that were developed: a trainer's manual, a facilitator's manual, and a workbook for Black men. And so the purpose of this training is actually to not only engage Black men, but also provide mentorship opportunity as well as leadership opportunity. And sometimes when you put things on paper, you don't really know how it will translate into practice, but it was indeed an emotional journey. So as a woman doing this work, I'm like, wow, I wonder how Black men will be receiving this information as we work with them. And so, sometimes you might hear terms such as men are broken. Men are being told through this training program, you're not broken, right? And so language has so much power, and we need to really break those chains that men have been shackled with for all these years. And so we'll tell you more about that, why we're taking that approach, right? And so we need to really look at intergenerational trauma, like the impact that these systems have also had on Black communities. But we also have to work towards healing. We have to have dialogue as well. And we also have to have accountability. And when I think of some programs that might be available to men, it's not about blame. We're not blaming men. We're saying, okay, this is what has happened. Now let's work through it. Let's support you so you can break this cycle of violence. We're also challenging systems, right? In terms of, using certain pieces. I'm a critical race scholar, so it's going to show up a lot in my work. But looking at Afrocentric approaches and looking at trauma, violence, informed approaches. And so using those different frameworks, we thought that would position us well to challenge systems. So the next thing I want to share with you is the design of the project. So initially I'm like, okay, 8 weeks, and I thought, could men stick around for like 8 weeks? So I thought of condensing it to 6, but then I went back to 8 weeks again. So the good thing is that men are so engaged. And remember Cheryl told you earlier, we went from 30 to about 24 men. It's not like they dropped out. So we just wanted to make sure that who we were engaging with were from Alberta and Ontario, okay? Because that's what we were funded for. And so that's the only reason the numbers changed, just in case they were from different parts of the country or the world. But even those that weren't able to continue, they were quite disappointed. So it goes to show you the need for this work. The other thing is, so 8 weeks, and what's interesting, and I want to thank our funders. Men are receiving an honorarium of $100 per session, right? And so if you think about it, this is very expensive to really facilitate something like this, but we recognize that people are showing up, they have different responsibilities, and we want to really honor that, their time, right? And their contributions, and to say we value what you have to bring to this table. And the other thing that I want to share with you, let me just, I'm going to break down the sample sessions so you get a chance to see what we've been doing in the sessions, and you get a chance to engage in that as well. So next slide, please. All right, so we looked at Black masculinity and stereotypes. And Cheryl will probably tell you a little bit about the man box and how that generated responses from participants. We looked at intergenerational trauma and accountability. The other thing that we're looking at is emotional literacy, and how do they show up in their relationships? So healthy relationships, what does that look like? We spent a lot of time talking about leadership, and one session, it's weaves throughout the session, and we also looked at what are the ways in which they can transform their communities. And so a group of men, I don't know yet, maybe half of the men or just over half will be receiving funding to take up the program in whatever version. I have 3 tiers. In terms of what they might feel comfortable engaging with. And so the 3rd tier is running the full program that they have just been a part of. But the 1st tier could be something like a cookout. It could be a barbershop conversation. So there's so many different ways in which they can engage communities. And so we are doing that with Black.
So the way in which we infuse some of the work here and our core strategies that we use, one is storytelling. So we started out our day storytelling. I asked you to tell your stories. We want them to tell their stories in their own voice, in the way that they need to tell it, so that they can be heard. And reflecting. Introspection is huge. So we're asking them to engage, and the workbook, there's a lot of engagement during our sessions, ways to ask questions, and then they're also engaging us to ask us questions as well. We have scenario-based learning, so some case studies, role play. Powerful things are really happening as we share even this upcoming week. We have them sometimes in groups of 4, groups of 3. And then this week we said, we're gonna put them in groups of 2, even though it was, scripted for 3. Don't tell Katrina that I did that. When we put them in groups of 2, and we went in to hear the very intimate things that they were talking about, and it changed the game a little bit in terms of them being able to actually share on a level that promoted the next activity that we moved into. We do a lot of grounding activities, so there's a lot of teaching in terms of grounding techniques, bringing ourselves back, where I'm often hearing, whoa, that was heavy. So how do we center that? How do we ground that? We have some different strategies that we use so that we can continue on doing the work. We don't shy away from anything. We lead into things as they become even more and more uncomfortable. And so those grounding strategies are highly important to be able to move forward. And then leadership practice. So Katrina mentioned, we're not framing things in ways like you are broken, okay? So we move it forward and we empower them within whatever context that they feel, their experiences of trauma, etc. And then we're engaging them in how do we then move to accountability. And that's done with care, that's done with a lot of repair work, that's done with a lot of giving permission to self and others in the group to actually just be. So we want to think of this idea of reimagining what leadership looks like. Not the dominant discourse that we currently have. I can say a lot about that today with what's going on in the world, but I'll leave it there for all of us to continue to imagine what we have learned already about leadership and what we know within the context of our various different roles. So we're taking this a little step further to give folks, or to give Black men who have not been given the permission or the idea of leadership in a way that is not rooted in violence and not rooted in a top-down structure. One of the things that myself and the co-facilitator, we try to carefully manage our relationship as well. So we're actually displaying leadership. We often joke because his resume is heavy. Like, he's got the doctor, he's got a MBA, he's got a lot of different things to his name. And so we joke about this a lot because he says, we're being watched. We're modeling certain behaviors. We're doing role plays, and I'm asking him also deep questions to really help the context of showing men how to be vulnerable in a safe, and we don't even use safe, accountable space. We don't use safe. We've moved beyond this idea of safe and brave spaces. We defined that early, and our space is an accountable space. It's relational, responsive, I already talked about, shared values, so we continue to go back to what were our values that we created, and remind ourselves about what we came here to do, and it's just really on transforming harm. Like, we had an exercise this week where we asked them directly, tell me some time where you've caused harm. And then we moved to the leadership in terms of, okay, well now how are we going to redefine that? And what do you do in order to reconcile those wrongs? So we're moving from this idea of narrative to practice. So yes, we want to hear the stories. Yes, they are very deep, but then we move forward in terms of what does that look like in practice. I often will say that when I teach in my classes in social work, theory to practice, theory to practice. What does it look like in a tangible thing? And Katrina mentioned this idea of the man box. Do folks know, if you wave at me for a sec, have you heard of this idea of the man box? Are there people who didn't? Yeah. And so even within our group, there was a lot of our participants who had never heard of the man box. And so it was coined by, I always forget the gentleman's name. You have to Google the name of the person who actually created it. And my co-facilitator actually co-facilitated with him as well. So he was very well versed in the man box when we introduced the concept, and pretty much we had them do an activity where they drew a box and how are they showing up within their box, and we asked some questions around, what systems expect you to be in the box, and who keeps you in the box was a big question. And during the session, I tell Katrina, she's not there, but she's kind of there. And I'm like, keep your phone, because I screenshot things and send it to her because it's so powerful. Like, this stuff makes me so emotional and giddy as I'm just watching the things transform. And a gentleman made a box and put a lock outside the box.
and within the box, he made a silhouette of himself in the box, but almost stepping out of the box. And it was just so powerful in terms of when we then debriefed and shared, and he talked, fighting back tears about the experiences of wanting to be out of the box, but that box keeps you shackled in the box, so my toe is out the box. But this is the first time I'm actually speaking about this box. And some of them went to Canva, they were drawing all kinds of things. Like, folks are really engaged and really just redefining what that looks like. So how do we take this box and still move from this idea of, hey, what society believes around what that box will look like, and how do you then, move from just the toe outside the box to being out the box. So powerful, powerful work that some of you are like, I do this stuff already. But the accountable space allows for it to be in the way that they need in those moments for the work to move forward. So, there were questions here, weren't they? Yes. What would it look like to intentionally reframe Black men's roles in your policies? And we're really just asking you to hear this, not necessarily answer right now, but really hear this. If we're actually thinking about Black men in terms of their experiences, what would it take? What would it look like to intentionally reframe Black men in your policies, programs, or research? Even that idea of violence came up for scrutiny, came up for discussion in terms of the definition of violence and how they don't ascribe to that definition for themselves. Even if I might have done this, in a moment I might have done an act, but now I'm labeled with this act for the rest of my life. This becomes my banner, this becomes my scarlet letter, this becomes how the world sees me, this becomes how the systems engage me, especially if I'm charged, all these things, I can't get away from it. Even though I may want to very well and want to undo, I can't undo the labels that come with me and stay with me as I move forward. Where is there room to create or scale leadership opportunities for Black men in domestic violence prevention? Is there room? How can we create room? What are some of the things that we might want to think about to do that? And then what are the risks of doing nothing and then leaving the narratives as they are?
It's amazing when you're having so much fun how quickly time goes. I am so glad we asked for 1 hour. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes to go, and I'm gonna ask that we do this as a large group exercise. Who's familiar with Ubuntu? Yes, who's familiar with trauma and violence informed approaches? Okay, who's familiar with critical race theory? Awesome, so we're gonna put our minds together and do this exercise, okay? All right, so in the session, men were asked to think of harmful language they hear at home and how they would support someone who has used harmful language, and what would that look like, okay? And so I'm just gonna move through this. A fellow Black man in your peer, so thank you, group shares that he's been using harsh or demeaning language toward his partner. He doesn't make excuses and says, I know it's not right, I just didn't grow up seeing it handled differently. I want to change. If you were to approach this Ubuntu in terms of this community approach, I am because we are, or Afrocentric leadership, CRT, critical race theory, or even trauma and violence informed principles, what are some of the things that we would need to think about? What are some things that we need to think about? Yes.
I think first and foremost, acknowledging the vulnerability that it takes to share and to recognize that he didn't witness or they didn't witness that at home, and thanking them for that statement, for that recognition, and recognizing that it's very hard to mirror what we have not witnessed ourselves.
Thank you. I think from the Afrocentric praxis, I think we'll be looking at the regime of principle of collective responsibility and accountability. we're also highlighting that, you know, when some of these things are starting to come out and the damage that it causes the community. So we're looking at that, and we're looking at how we heal, ensure how that, like how we heal together as a community, like as a village. So giving the opportunity to unpack some of these intergenerational issues that are showing up, you know, and then the importance of showing, and you know, just holding space of where you share, when you're hiding, because hard people, when you're hiding and you're hiding a meal, then that translates. If you have children, then it's going to be impacting the children, and it has to bring somewhere, just so where it is, their approach is much more of a strength-based than a advocacy approach, and it's much more where it is embracing. Because if you're looking back from colonizing praxis, we're looking at where we embrace people when people are hurting. We did not discard people, we invited them in to try and understand what is it that is hurting you, because when you hurt, it hurts. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And let's look at CRT as systems approach. Who has a systems approach? How do we interrogate systems? How do we reflect on systems and support this person? Systems, challenge, come on.
Alright, I'll do my best with this one. I was gonna do TBIC, but I think it's important that we acknowledge what people can be accountable for and what they can't be. And so I think we can distinguish between how we've replicated beliefs we've been given by systems, but how systems also systematically work to keep us in a box, keep those beliefs. And I think through that, we can then also start to acknowledge where that's shown up in other areas of people's lives. So, okay, so if you haven't been shown positive relationships in this sense, where else has that shown up? Did that show up at school? Did that show up at work? Did that show up in how you think about yourself, how you talk about yourself? And then let's switch that. So if we have a little bit of accountability and control over what we think, how we act, who we engage with, and to someone's earlier point, that vulnerability, that those are all choices you're making within systems. So let's focus on the empowerment you have to make change and take like a structural approach to this, that we can change structure with individual action. This takes a lot of time, and then I think back to that connection to each other. If we can all agree.
Lunch for day 2.
She's excited. She's excited. Oh, I'm gonna try to guess.
You know, being able to do this conference is a really great pleasure for us.